Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I wanted to welcome all of you to this monthly event called Tajdid. For those of you who do not know, it comes from the Arabic word Jadid and Yujaddid, which means new and to renew. There is a hadith in which the Prophet, peace be with him, said that every 100 years, God will send a mujaddid. God will send someone who will help the ummah renew their faith for them. And there have been so many writings on this concept of mujaddid, someone who would help reform, renew, think over about, there have been so many writings about this concept. And I thought at Georgetown University we are expected to think, to reflect, to question. We are told it's okay to ask, it's okay to question, it's okay to be honest about how you feel and what you feel. We are told that thought-provoking ideas are helpful, and that's what I hope for us to do in the coming years with this monthly program. I did not want it to be a big lecture, but rather a discussion where a few people could come together to discuss big ideas or speak honestly about what has been, what is, and what needs to be. Believing that if we don't think critically about where Islam now is and be forward-looking in terms of what we want Islam to be and where we want Muslims to be in 100 years from now, if we don't do that, we will be going in the wrong direction. Mentioning the hadith is rather important for me to say that it's a noble thing to do what we are doing. And I know in our ummah, there are people who think it's haram, it's wrong to ask. And there are so many imams with whom you would not even dare asking these tough questions. You will be told you are heretic, you are murtad, you are kafir, you are whatever it is. Not at Georgetown University, inshallah rabbil alameen. And I thought to start this year with this panel is quite important. Listening and hearing the perspective of two of our sisters, two of our fellow members in our ummah, who were not born to this faith or to this religious community, and decided at one point to join this community, to become Muslims. Some people would like to call them reverts. Some people like to call them converts. I'm not into this battle what to call this. Without further ado, I wanted to introduce very briefly, because I was basically threatened if I were to say any too good stuff about our speakers for tonight. Michele from Maryland, thank God. Anyway, we have at least one person, one, two, oh good. So, from Baltimore, who studied at AU, International Studies, then did her master's in Russian literature. And if you want to chat with her in Russian, she is, my God, better than Arabic. The only thing is I don't know whether she's saying the right thing or not. I don't know Russian. I don't know what that is. It means that you are good. Yeah. Now she's at Georgetown University with doing marketing and recruitment for the McCourt School of Public Policy. And we are very honored to have you, Michele, here.
Is like anybody interested in a master's degree?
Yeah, she's willing to recruit you. Yes, yeah, good. From a basketball player to public policy. Yes. And to her right is Susan Douglas. I have known Susan, my God, for years. And she's, without any doubt, my teacher in so many ways. And I'm not going to say too much good stuff, because she told me not to say too good stuff. I already violated the rules. From Cleveland, Ohio. Any Ohio here? Any Ohio. We have few people, but not tonight. But do we have? Yes, we do have some people from Ohio. Who did her undergrad in history from University of Manchester.
Rochester.
Rochester, okay, sorry. And went to live for 10 years in West, no, not West Africa.
Berlin.
West what?
West Berlin, Germany.
Oh my God, so she speaks really good German. And she established a business in?
West Berlin, Germany.
In what?
Sewing.
In sewing.
Actually sewing for boutiques, and then we decided that if we can sew for them, we could make our own stuff, so we did.
And that's her hobby, by the way,
Yes.
also. So if you have anything to do with sewing, give it to her tonight.
I do sewing lessons too, by the way.
Really? Oh my God. That's where is Sarah? Sarah, that's an idea for a program for Muslim
No,
life.
seriously, we do. We start with a bag, and we move up to an actual shirt.
Then she did her master's degree in Arabic studies, specialized in history, and now about to finish her PhD in about 10 years from, I'm sorry, in 2 years.
Yeah.
In 2 years from now.
Pray for me.
In world history. So she is quite a person, and she has been all over lecturing, speaking, and she works now with the Center for Contemporary Arabic Studies, and hopefully we'll hear something about that in the questions and answers.
Want to do a master's degree in Arabic studies?
Eric, can we hire them for campus ministry to do marketing?
I'll check the budget.
Okay, I have really 2 questions or 3 questions for both Michele and Susan before we start dialoguing with our speakers and with ourselves. Question number 1. We introduced you as American converts. You have been a convert, Susan, for 42 years. Michele, you have been a convert for 15 years. And what back then, what got you to be on this road? What got you to convert? What was in America, in your own background, and in West Berlin, and where? Oh my God, a big story. Sorry. Yeah. Yes. And by the way, like 3 minutes for these questions.
Yeah. So I think my story is pretty bizarre, but okay, I'll share it. At university, I met the greatest people in the whole world. I was born a Catholic, raised a Catholic. My father is a deacon in the Catholic Church. We have different people of different religions in our family, but the core is Catholic. And so I went to John Carroll High School, the whole 9 yards, Catholic school, all my life. Got to university, I was like, ooh, this is interesting. There are a bunch of different people that I've never met, never seen, never done anything. At the end of the day, it was a lot of my friends, actually. So we always tell folks that are at university, act your best, because everybody's watching you and they see how you act and they see how you are, and that's what I did with my friends. I saw how they acted, I saw how they were, I saw how nice they were, I saw what their beliefs were through the way that they conducted themselves in their lives. And so they didn't do drugs like the other guys. They were, just amazing, very friendly. At the end of the day, I started asking questions, and it was like, So then I took classes, and then I took formal classes, and then my friend's brother was an imam, and so we got into all these crazy discussions. And I had a huge group of people that were very supportive. It took me a long time to come to that decision, because I like to say you don't come to that lightly. You have to be really strong of character to be able to do that, to leave your past behind you in a way, and your family's, the way that they raised you. And so that presents its all sets of character questions about you and from you, and especially in my dad's position of being a religious individual. The Archbishop called him in and said, "What's going on? You lost your daughter to Islam. I don't understand this. How is this even possible?" So it created some interesting rifts in the family, but eventually Islam was the path for me, because it spoke to me. It spoke to me of who I was and what I believed, and what I was raised as a Catholic was not out of context with Islam, but Islam offered me some other opportunities to understand, whereas the door of Catholicism was shut. You kind of understand where I'm saying this? And the worst thing in the whole world, and I'll share this with you, this was what really turned my corner, which is I took a friend of mine to church with me one day with my dad and the ordination and everything, and the priest, waited until everybody else left, and it was just my family and my friend, who was from Oman. And it was his first time to church. And the priest looked at him and said, "You're going to hell." I was speechless then, and I'm speechless now. I couldn't fathom that. I couldn't understand that. I just didn't understand what this priest was telling this friend of mine, who was a great individual, who had some, really, he was amazing. And I couldn't believe that this person who was so good and had such a good life and helped people and donated money and just did everything possible to help the poor would be going to hell because he was a Muslim. And that just, for me, was the end of Catholicism. And I was like, now I understand what my path is going to be, because I can't be of a faith that has such a narrow view of people. It boggled my mind. So that's my story.
Susan?
You have to imagine, it was 1974, by the way, so I just remembered back.
So 42, 40 instead of 42.
Yeah. So you have to imagine, I grew up and went to high school in the 1960s, and that was a time when even multiculturalism was just beginning to dawn, and a lot of the independence movements were going on in Africa and elsewhere, and so it was possible, and I now study this actually, this history of education, because I also teach and have taught social studies history for quite a long time. So you have to imagine being able to grow up and go through an entire education, not just from kindergarten through high school, 12th grade, but all the way through a history degree, 4-year college, a good one on top of that, and know nothing about Islam. Not so much as to have heard the word, or if I did, it was something in connection with the Crusades and I was looking out of the window that 5 minutes or something. And so when I left the United States in the early 1970s, I went to Berlin, Germany. My background is German, and he forgot the secret thing.
Oh, the secret is both are from a German background, so we're in a German conspiracy here. Yes.
So I went after college. I learned German in college. We had like one German speaker in the family that was like my grandfather's cousin or something. And but I went during college just to go to Europe and see, and I was fascinated that there was something here that I didn't know how to connect with, and so I happened to be in Germany. I went with a group of college friends from the Eastman School of Music, who were we were all looking for jobs in those days. I graduated into a recession twice, my undergrad and my master's degree, and so there were not the kind of jobs that you could easily find at that time, not unfamiliar situation, right? So anyway, in Germany it was very possible to live very inexpensively, and this happened also a decade or so ago when people went into Eastern Europe when it first opened. You could live there for a long time. In fact, I can't even imagine how long I lived on whatever little bit of savings I had. But I ended up making a business, and when I was in Germany, I met Muslims for the first time. Maybe there were some on campus, but in those days people didn't, appear because they were not wearing anything different from anybody else. So I met Muslims for the first time, and knew nothing. What I remember most is having gone to the American Memorial Library after meeting them and finding a book that was about yay thick, and I don't know who the author was, I don't know what the title was, but what it was a straight comparison of Christianity and Islam. The stories, and I was turning the pages going, what? Adam, Eve, Moses, Noah, Abraham, Jesus? And I kept reading, here's the story from the biblical side, and I should mention also that before in my later years in high school, I was with a group of also young people we were kind of church hopping. I was raised Presbyterian, not by a very committed religious family, but they used to drop us off to church. My dad would go back and have another cup of coffee and then pick us up later, my sister and I. But I dragged my parents to church when I was being confirmed and all that. So anyway, it didn't take, but in any case. So I started really investigating as part of my history studies. I studied, for example, the American origins of the Black Church. I studied Wesleyanism. I studied, just because it was interesting as a piece of social history. So I already had kind of a background of going to different churches, and then at some point there was an young Episcopal priest in Cleveland who had a really, really interesting youth group. He respected us very much, and we were reading Kierkegaard and watching movies that we didn't understand, but we sure pretended or tried or something. But and then not only was he doing like intellectually challenging things with this youth group, but also having us do public service in some of the poorer parts of the city and so on. So anyhow, here's the little background. So by the time I got to this book, and I found myself turning the pages going, whoa, so that could be another page. Oh, yeah, okay, there's that story and that story. Oh, yeah, that could be. And just finding this whole thing so utterly familiar. But it had, in the core story, for me, the answer was, not a sort of all paths lead to Rome type of thing, but the fact that Islam is of a piece with the very original religion of Adam. This to me was amazing, that it wasn't, there's this religion and there's that one and then there's how these understand it and those understand it, but embracing all of them, going all the way back to a continuous story. So that made me say to myself, what is there to prevent this from being true? It rang really true to me. So that was how I came to it, and didn't really know very much about Islam other than that. So I went into it, I almost like to say it's kind of like some of the early Muslims who didn't know the whole apparatus, of Islam. They just knew those basic things. And so I accepted it on that basis, and then went on to grapple with things that came to me as new, particularly things having to do with family and women and myself, and then meeting the community and becoming introduced to, and of course as a teacher of history, I then said, whoa, so what happened in Islamic history that got us here from wherever that was? And so I'm still at that years and years later, trying to learn the history and teach it.
So that's what got you into Islam, both of you. And we will now transition to the second question. So you have this positive image of Islam, amazing image of a faith that's inclusive, peace, makes sense, rational. Mm-hmm. And here you are in the 21st century. If you were to watch the Republican debate, if you had watched it 2 days ago, there's so many attacks on Islam. Between every sentence and another sentence, there's a sentence, radical Islamic terrorism, and you have this, Islam is a threat, and watching Fox News, watching CNN, watching Yemen, watching Egypt, watching, my God, Taliban, Boko Haram. And do you say to yourselves, what got me into this? Is it Islam? Is it the Quran? Is it Hadith? Is it Sharia? Is it I was deceived into a faith of deception, as some people call it? Or is it something else? What goes through your mind, and how do you digest this data? Or do you go home and your parents say, or your brothers, sisters who happen to be of other faiths, what is that you're having on? I mean, you must be abused in your own faith, and this crazy religion that does all of this bad stuff. I wonder that, I'm sure you're going through a lot, so tell us.
If you like, there's an the old cartoon, maybe some of you know the expression, but it's a real oldie but goodie, and it was for the cartoon Pogo. We have met the enemy and he is us. I didn't have that experience. This is all quite recent. I mean, all of this, I remember one thing, because as I had come back to the U.S. and started teaching again, in the classroom, I started developing materials for teaching about Islam, its history and culture and one thing and another. And my own experience writing and researching and so on has taken me, deeper and deeper into, I mean, when you read history, it's not a pretty picture, right? I mean, human beings may be trying and striving, and one of the most interesting, big, fat, 3-volume books about Islamic history is from Marshall G.S. Hodgson from the University of Chicago. He passed away in the 70s. His book lives on, and he's one of the original world historians, Marshall G.S. Hodgson. And his book is called The Venture of Islam, Conscience and Civilization, Conscience and Society in a World Civilization. So he's one of these guys who got it. He got what he called the Sharia-minded, which doesn't take on the same meaning as now. He meant the renewal that has, just as you're talking about Tajdid, the renewal that has happened over and over again, striving as society from the grassroots. Where the caliphate might have gone off and become an empire, there was always this sense of grounding and recentering and renewal that came from the grassroots, and tried even to hold the political powers and military powers that have come and gone to a higher standard, and that he sees this as the theme of Islam. So in trying to understand this history and becoming more complicated, I actually found my way to world history, because Islam, when it was at its strongest as a society, as a civilization, was at its most open. Things coming in and things going out, influences going out. So when people, and in fact when many Muslim countries teach their students in school systems about Islamic history, they almost teach it as Planet Islam, just like we teach Planet America and American history. They want to put it behind a firewall in their brains somewhere, instead of understanding that there was this breathing in and out of influences that made Islam have its strength. So I remember having done this for 20-some years of, teaching and researching and writing materials for curriculum and all this stuff, and then 9/11 happened. And I was like, okay, before it happened, I said, how far are we going to get with this project until somebody does something really stupid? Ta-da, that was it. And I felt like I went into such a depression for like a little while, thinking, oh my God, this is it. And then people started calling, school systems started calling for us to come and talk. And the surge of wanting to know about Islam, and the way that the American public, school teachers at that time came at it was, they would ask us to come and they would say it isn't so. Say this is not Islamic. What they've done is something else altogether. It's only gotten worse, and to try to understand why Boko Haram and why, I would say Boko Haram. Right? This could be another name. Whatever. And all these, like what happened today, it was in the news from Pakistan. Somebody goes into a mosque during Friday prayer and shoots 16 people. Under what kind of Islam is that ever been a possible scenario? Sacred spaces are sacred spaces, whether it's an Islamic sacred space or whether it's of another faith. It's not possible to imagine doing that. And so you can't even begin to comprehend. But people are still saying, say it isn't so. And it isn't, obviously. So there's this big debate, is it Islamic? It's very difficult to deal with. But we just have to keep kind of reasoning and looking at the fact that there's other things under the surface that we don't see that have brought these situations about. And maybe we can talk a little bit about them as we go on.
Michele?
So I think we were talking about this a little bit earlier too, and so I'll kind of reiterate a little bit of that. the space I grew up in, the formative years and things like that after 9/11, was with a lot of folks from the Khalij, right? And so I didn't get from people outside of that, you know, what's going on, why 9/11, that kind of stuff. I got, are you being made to wear a hijab? I used to wear abaya and shayla, okay? Full disclosure here. I spent a little time in the Emirates. And so, like, why do you have to do that? I don't understand. And it's like, yeah, I don't have to do anything. I'm doing it because, you know, I want to. And you'd go through this whole litany, and then the next person would come along. Why do you have to do this? Is a man making you do this? Well, no. And then eventually when I got married, it was even better because it's, well, of course your husband's Saudi. He's making you do this. You don't have any rights. And I'm like, you get tired after a while of saying the same thing over and over and over again. And so after 9/11, it just exploded, like, in a way, because it would be people that I didn't know, and they'd be like, oh, what a terrible thing, you know. And I'm like, I didn't do it. They were crazy. I can't tell you how crazy they were. I'm sorry. I don't know what to say to you anymore. It just became a terrible thing. And so more of late, working here at the McCourt School, it's very interesting because most folks, I interview all international students, right? So part of my marketing recruitment. And so you get some strange looks. I forget sometimes that I wear hijab, right? It just is what it is, right? And so I'm getting on Skype and I'm like, you know, hey, how you doing? You know, I'm trying to assess their English language skills. And you keep like, and they don't, and I'm like, do they not speak English? And then I realized, oh, it's me. And so one of the students, I kid you not, was a great guy. I can't mention names. I can mention the country. It's Japan. And so he's an older guy, maybe in his 40s. And he's like, his jaw just could not go up. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about something that you feel comfortable with. Let's talk about your work in this ministry. And he's like, no, let's talk about Islam. I don't understand. Why do you people do this? But you're not really an Islam, are you? And I was like, oh, God. What is
that?
Yeah. I chalked that up to language, okay? But it was...
I've heard worse than that.
But it was sort of like, really? You're going to take this time to ask me about some horrible experience that you've maybe heard of on the news during your interview? Okay, let's go. Let's go. I'm up for this. And so the whole interview was about how he had a negative impression of Islam and Muslims because one Muslim he met drank alcohol. I'm like, that's it? That's all you got? Okay. I mean, there's so many other things you could be jaded about, right? And he's like, no, I just didn't understand, so why would you do that if you say you don't do it? And then he eventually got to the blowing up of things in Japan and whatever, and there was some horrible thing that happened in Japan. And I was like, I don't know what to say to you other than I'm really sorry and I didn't do it. And, you know, there are crazy people in every religion and in every, you know, situation and in every nationality. And if they actually read the scriptures and maybe they paid attention to them, then they wouldn't be doing that. As our interview over. So
did he get accepted?
He actually did not. It was through. It wasn't me. It wasn't me. Yeah, that was like the craziest time I've had. And so, you know, a lot of it having been who I was married to and sort of adopted some of their culture and some of the things that, you know, come along with marriage and family and things like that. I got it from the other side too, by the way. So don't think that it's only Americans that are crazy. It's actually folks as well from different places. It's like, oh, you're American. You must have slept around before you became a Muslim. Really? Why would you think that? Like, because I'm American, right? It's like magic, right? So you get it from both sides too, and even the 9/11 thing. Oh, well, you guys deserved it. Tell me why. Why did these people who have no idea what was going on deserve it, right? And so, yeah, you got crazy stuff going on. I don't know. It would make me crazy.
You add anything to that? Well, so you have this bad image of Islam in the public square that you have to deal with all the time. And something can be done to change that public image. What is that? We'll start with you, Michele.
So I think that goes back to what I said. One of the first comments is you live your religion, and so if you are a good, upstanding, amazing person, and you go out into the community and do things, people see that, and so then they're like, maybe they're not all really bad, or maybe just because she wears a hijab, she's not like an alien. Or, oh my God, it's maybe that she's not oppressed. So maybe all women in Islam aren't oppressed. Maybe they have minds. Oh, you studied science and you're a Muslim? That's not compatible, is it? It's like, oh my God, please. So, living that, again, it's hard to talk to you guys about it, but living Islam is your best way of influencing and helping people to see that what is out there is a lot of, well, I'm in marketing and recruitment, but a lot of it is negative media and marketing at the end of the day, to get someone's point across and some kind of political agenda that they have. And so, all you can do as one individual is all you can do. So if you go out, you do good deeds, you do good works, you are a good human being, you make friends, you try to engage people, it helps.
Thank you. Susan.
Well,
by the way, Muslim women drink coffee too?
No.
They
drink tea.
Oh, tea. Okay.
So, as I mentioned before in the story, as someone who was a teacher before, and before I went to Germany, before I accepted Islam, and when I returned to the U.S., I had lived in Germany for like 10 years, and then in Egypt for 2 after I got married. I had converted, in other words, before getting married. And then when I came back here, I started teaching, and as I was teaching, I was developing, because I teach history, social studies, I was developing materials for teaching. And among the things that were going on at that time in the early 90s was many of you would have gone through schools that had suddenly testing and standards and all these subjects, and you had to take these gateway tests. Well, this was all kind of new in the early 90s and late 80s. But one of the things that took place, in addition to states writing standards, was that multiculturalism phased over in teaching social studies into something more broad and more universal called world history. So it wasn't like how many different cultures can we cover separately, but now world history is blending and melding them together into a human story, which is, if you ask me, way better. Because it isn't like, oh, we have a lot of Vietnamese people in this school district, so therefore we should teach a lot about Vietnam. But over here in Westchester County, no, don't bother, right? So world history says, if it's part of the human story and the story doesn't make sense without it, teach about it. And it's like integrating things. So along these lines, I got drawn, further out even of just Islamic history and into world history and teaching about interactions and all of that kind of stuff. So one of the hallmarks of that period also was the expansion of standards in the States for teaching about religions, all of them, the major 5 especially. And so I got involved in that work, and it's really quite fascinating that there's a set of constitutional guidelines for doing that that you can use to help teachers know, like their administrators might not know it's allowed to talk about God and read scriptures in the classroom without proselytizing, without making truth claims. So it becomes part of teaching history, teaching social studies. So I got involved in both of these areas and in the world history movement and was writing materials. So from 2007 until just before I came to the Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, I was doing workshops out in the States for the Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, and which is how I got to know Brother Yahya, I think. So one of the things that I found, in addition to, like, I used to do a few workshops casually around the time after, before 9/11. After 9/11, all of us who did any kind of work like this, we went from like 4 workshops a year to 40. I mean, it was amazing. And school districts just wanting to know. I think 5 or 6 days after 9/11, the school board of the state of Virginia called 4 or 5 of us to come on a panel on a radio show. I mean, they really wanted to know. So, kudos to the American teachers and educators that they really tried. And many of them were in their classrooms on the day this happened. So I started to develop presentations, and then in 2007, when I started doing workshops really all over the country, I would do this very basic presentation on Islam that would just lay out, didn't start with the 5 pillars, the 5 pillars were way at the end of it, just explaining what are the basic beliefs and practices and why. And you would be amazed at what teachers, when they would say, I mean, really? That's all it is? That's the whole, this basic, yeah, of course, that makes sense. They would say this over and over again because they had never heard that. They had seen it as something exotic or something. And sometimes they would ask me, is that like what you're saying, is that your Islam or is that? I said, totally basic stuff. I have to tell one story because it was the most amazing thing. The Kennedy Center held a festival called Arabesque, and they have ushers, people who are retired DC government workers and all kinds of people that come, and they're ushers, and they get free tickets to Kennedy Center stuff. So before this Arabesque thing, they did a workshop for those ushers, and I don't know, 100 people in the room or something like that. And they held it in the Jazz Theater, which is like all black tables, chair, ceiling, everything, right? And thank God I didn't wear black that day. I would have been like the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland. But I went in there, and they wanted to start with a basic presentation on Islam, so I did. This lady in the audience stood up in the Q&A session and said, "You can't possibly be trying to tell me that this Islam that you're talking about is the same one as those people over there are doing, right?" And I was, I had to take a breath, right? So out of the back of this dark black room, in nighttime it was, this man stood up and he said, "I'm from Turkey. I've been here for 25 years. I don't really practice Islam like I should, but what she's saying, that's what my grandmother said." And I wanted to go and, first of all, give him a huge hug. But this is the kind of thing that happens. So, end of story.
Wow. The last question before we go to the audience. I remember one of these cases recently when someone went into a church and killed people. I was saying to myself, God, make it a Christian, not a Muslim. Make it a Christian, not a Muslim. Not because I want him to be a Christian, but because, as you know, we respond 24/7 to these cases. And my God, Islam now, every crazy guy who does something wrong, it becomes Islam.
Not quite, no, it's not.
Well, you know what's going on. I mean, we respond to every bad thing around the world as if it's Islam. Do you sometimes have this... I wish Muslims would change in 1, 2, 3. Does that come to your mind? Things you would hope, you would wish Muslims would do or say that would help Islam, will help us, will help the world, will help a rational discourse as we move forward. What are those things you hope Muslims would rework, redo, restudy,
You go first.
I was going to punt to you.
No way.
But you might get more than you bargained for because I'm into history, right? It's of course, I wish everybody would wake up and understand some really basic stuff, that you don't go into a place of worship and kill people, whether it's because they're from a different sect or whatever other crazy stuff. And even just, you can always wish that human beings, no matter whether they're your own family members or whether they're somebody way out there in the other side of the world, that they would live according to their principles. That's universal. That's the nature of the human being. And you can quote the verse in the Surah Al-Baqarah in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is creating the human being, and the angels question him by saying, "Will you create
man that will spread mischief on earth
and shed blood?" And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala answers,
"I know what you know not."
I know what you know not. So the angels are also protesting, and not protesting Allah, but they're saying, and we worship you all the time, day and night, and without pause, right? And so this is one of the verses that really rocked me to become Muslim. that whole story, creation story there. So you wish those things, but on the other hand, when you look into the history of it and what's going on right now, you have to ask yourself if this blatant ignorance that's being displayed by people who are turning to absurdly violent acts that are so obviously not within the bounds of religion, that it's a case of diminishing returns. And one of the ironies of a century and a half of hammering on secularism, insisting on, secularizing nation states, developing within a secular framework with secular education systems and all this kind of stuff, putting Islam and other religions' conversations out of the mainstream, the kind of conversation that you can have in this society, and radicalizing people by excluding them from so many of these post-colonial states, and running the education systems that are really only giving a partial story of Islam, and many of the institutions that produce what I call the slow-cooked, evolution of ideas like Islamic law and spirituality and things like that. Most of those institutions were taken down by so-called modernity and or colonialism, and their funds were taken off and made into the state. So if you've done this for 4, 5, 6 generations, even almost 10 generations by now, since the mid-1900s, and I'm not blaming the world for Islam's problems, no. But if you do that, and then after 6, 7 generations of diminishing returns in terms of people knowing about their faith, then you call on them and say, why are you ignorant about your faith? And I'm not just talking about ignorance, I'm talking about oppression and imprisoning and, the dance of the state, authoritarian states with people who had, as a normal thing, as we do even in the West, a religious impulse that was behind their whole lives, not just their inner lives. I hold a lot of that responsible for it. It's actually not just ironic, it's foolish to expect people to have a broad knowledge of their religion when you've been saying, this is just bunk and nonsense. And this is not just an Islamic problem.
Michele?
I'm actually going to take that in a different direction too, which is, again, coming from that formative thing in all of my now ex-husband's relatives from Saudi Arabia. They have an unusual way of looking at the world. And so my wish has always been for them to be more broad-minded, to sort of embrace Islam the way Islam was meant, at least I think, meant to be, and not so narrow in scope. I love my Saudi brothers. I grew up with them. They were the ones that brought me to Islam. I love them and I pray for them every day because they to me, need the most prayers in a way, because they have an under society and it's waiting to explode. I mean, I think somebody's going to beat me after I leave this place, but to me, it's so fire and brimstone and not a lot of love, the way that Islam is practiced there. And so it's bubbling up and it's going to explode. And my wish is that they sort of step back from it and sort of embrace a little bit of love on their side and a little bit of acceptance and a little bit of understanding.
Which is firewall Islam. Put your religion behind a firewall and, defensive Islam rather than one that is open and breathes influences in and out, even though the world does. And
I mean, it's great to have rules, and I'm all about rules, and I'm all about having a non-secular society. I'm there too, but there are some downfalls and pitfalls of that. And my other big wish is that American Muslims take a bigger role in the global interpretation of Islam. Sorry, I said it. Okay. American Muslims are really just not as active as we should be on the global arena.
Thank you. Wow. Questions? Thank you, Sarah, for starting that. Okay, questions, points? Yes.
I wasn't really, I consider myself, I wasn't really a practicing Muslim when I was back home. And coming back here was like a huge fear, oh, she's not going to be Muslim anymore. She's going to get lost, all this nonsense. But anyway, looking back now, I feel like it's more of the way we educate, like, our community, the Muslim community, the way we educate ourselves about Islam. I think that really, really needs to change. Because the way I was educated about Islam back home and the way I am learning now is totally different. Totally different. It's mind-blowing how, just being a girl, that's a huge issue, again, in my country, like just being a girl. I probably won't be doing this, dressed up like this, playing basketball, like probably wearing shorts, and no matter how I try to cover my head, no, you gotta be home. Stuff like that. I feel like we need to reevaluate the way we educate ourselves in the Muslim community, most especially for women. That needs to change. So that's my point.
Absolutely spot on. It's funny because I know so many people that have that same thing where it's like, they were kind of religious, but not, like zealots, let's say. Back at home, and they come here, and it's like everyone's like, oh my God, you're going to lose your religion, Like my friends, they send their cousins here, and they send their daughters here, and it's like, Michelle, you're going to watch after them, right? Because America's such a terrible place that they're going to drink all the time, and they're going to go and party and go to clubs, and I'm like, if that's not in their character, why would they do it here, right? But some of the brothers, and I'll single brothers out instead of sisters, some of the brothers think that's the coolest thing since white bread, because it's like, woohoo, I get to be free. And it's like, but it was in your character to begin with. And so, you're using that maybe as an excuse that you're in the United States and you feel like it's a place to do it in. But getting back to that sort of, holistic approach, if you will, about religion, you find a little bit more of it everywhere you go, maybe, and hopefully you bring a little bit of maybe not piety, but you know what I'm saying, you incorporate a little bit more of it into your life as you go along, and women especially, you have such a heavy load sometimes to deal with, given either the societal or cultural norms and how they influence Islam. It's a tough road for women. It's tough.
Thank you for wonderful.
If I could just build on that a little bit. I have 4 kids, and the youngest 2 are 23-year-old twins, girls, who grew up here, and I did my best to, not just say, don't do this because I said so, but, here's why, and here's what I think. We went as far as actually practically inventing a school for a period of time when they were in upper elementary and middle school, and they didn't want to stop. We kept going, and then they finished high school in public school. So over along the way, they had, different teachers who taught about Islam and, Islamic studies and all that kind of stuff. And so, they are trying now to find their way to what Islam means to them. And one of my daughters has coined a lovely expression that she felt she got from so many textbooks on Islamic studies and teachers who taught about it here, many of whom were from overseas. She calls it checklist Islam. And she would say, how can they say, if you do this, you're going to get this number of extra rewards. If you do that, you're going to get this extra number of rewards. And then, she has the people she calls, are you the extra credit Muslim or the, like, it's like your dance card kind of thing, So this she has come to the conclusion is not, meaningful. And it's not going to give you the foundation for knowing how to encounter situations that you really have to think about. Everybody has to almost be a mufti, nowadays. And it's, even when they're like 5 years old going to the store to buy some candy, they've got it like, is there gelatin in here? Is there, So you have to teach them to think. So I really, really second what you're saying. The education about Islam has to really, really become real. It has to become grounded not just in the rules and regulations, but in what do you do and how do you live Islam and how do you let it inform your values.
Yes.
Hello, for anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Ghada. I have actually a question about, like, I know both of you came to Islam, which is like hard, but like I'm from Saudi Arabia and I grew up as a Muslim, but I consider myself Muslim since I was 21. The time when I wore hijab and I started to be not religious, but I consider myself a Muslim. So like, was it hard to be not culturally Muslim and became to the Islamic culture and meet and talk to other people around you about that? Because I've seen like some converts friends and they're struggling with the culture because it's different. The Islamic culture, not the Islam, the culture Islam. So I don't know from your opinion or your experience, like, was it hard, or how both of you like get over like these struggles in their lives?
Well, like I mean, again, full disclosure, my ex-husband was from Saudi Arabia, so of course I adopted some of the cultural components of that. But I tried to steer clear of adopting his culture. And that to me meant that I follow my own culture. I wanted him to adopt a lot of my culture. I think that Islam is the component that we need to concentrate on. And so, yeah, sure. I mean, I don't mind, doing some crazy things, and sometimes I would consider them crazy, that my mother-in-law would ask me to do, or something like that, a cultural kind of a thing. But at the end of the day, I really want to separate the two. I guess that's my American perspective. I have a culture, and I'm happy with it. I don't want to adopt someone else's culture, but I'm happy with the practices of Islam. And so I marry those two together, and I hope successfully. You could probably ask my ex-husband. He probably wouldn't say I was as successful because I didn't follow the way, so to speak, and I wasn't as maybe quiet and demure and not questioning and do as I say, not as I do. And so...
That's a long lasting.
I'm sorry.
But I think that was one of those moments, too, where he got a big surprise when he married an American. And I think that...
No joke.
Yeah. I like to say that when I became a Muslim, they shopped me around for about 1.5 years to find a man that could handle me.
Gee, that's pretty good. It took me 6.
Because I was just like, I'm not going to sit at home. I'm not going to just have babies. I'm not, maybe that's your cultural thing, and I'm happy for you if that works for you. But that's not who I am. I have, I was doing my master's degree. I'm not going to give that up to follow someone else's cultural imperative. And so, again, I think it's probably an American way of looking at it, but I really strongly feel like I can divorce culture, for the most part, from religion.
I'm going to take the other side of that because when I became Muslim, it was a gradual process because I had learned about the tenets of the faith and the scriptures and the prophets and all that kind of stuff, and I didn't really get to know Muslims until gradually, and there were a number of them, but as I learned about these things and as I encountered, different Muslims of different cultures there in Germany, and I was also kind of like a free lunatic because I was not expected to be like a German, I'm not, and there weren't that many Americans around me, so I had kind of free reign for a while. But the most important thing about answering that issue was I felt like as I learned what Islam now expects of me, and not just about stories of prophets and this and that and the other thing, I realized that I would need to have a garage sale personally, and take all of the stuff out of my closet and see in the attic and the basement, and see what am I going to keep and what am I going to toss, right? Like, what are the essential things that align with Islam and that align with this behavior that's expected of me as a Muslim, and then what am I going to have to, jettison, get rid of? And I'm still at that too, by the way. But and of course, I think one of the things that you mentioned when you change to a different country and leave your own culture, I did that more than once. Once in being from America, being in Germany and the language, and then another time going to Egypt and living in actually my husband's village and learning the language again, and then coming back. I came back to the U.S., I swear I was like an immigrant. I had been out 12 years, and I had, I was in shock. Everything was open 24 hours a day when I came back, and I was like, what is this? And the prices, I was in the supermarket in shock. But this process of separating yourself from your, roots, and then you get a chance to really assess. And this happens to so many migrants and immigrants to come and be separated out and realize, oh yeah, that's what's essential. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, it's like having a big garage sale. And I remember sometimes when I would hear something that somebody told me Islam required of me, I was like, whoa, wait a minute, can I do this? And it would take time to sort of digest it. And it's also very difficult because when you read, if you go on a forum or you have a question about something you're supposed to do, if there are 6 people answering, they're going to have 10 opinions. Mm-hmm. So it's it's not easy to know what to do. And even when people toss around scriptures and hadith, well, it really means this and it really means that, and this one is authentic and that one maybe not, and it's tough. It's tough.
Yes.
You mentioned something about Muslim women having this hardship, right? And I honestly see it as a dual. There's the internal hardship, which is dealing with either family members or dealing just with our Muslim brothers, I guess, and how we're treated with them across, I guess you'd say, throughout the entire world, because it's not just Saudi, it's everywhere. And then we have the external hardship, which is the struggle against the rest of the world, especially with your cover. I think wearing the hijab is like a symbol, like you are Islam. It's like when you walk, when you're walking, it's like that girl's Muslim. No, she's actually Islam. And so how do we as women? Because I love talking about love talking about all the hardship that we're facing. But how do we as women take power? How do we as Muslim women regain that power? Because we have it. Our scripture tells us that we have justice. So how do we, go out and get it?
If you figure this out, we are gonna we're gonna copyright whatever you say and sell it. No, that's the hardest part. So Islam empowers us. We're the most empowered people there are, women, right? We just have to get everybody else to believe it.
I think, sorry for interrupting, but in a way, I think for a lot of Muslim women, it's the actualization of that power. Mm-hmm. We know it exists, but we don't take it upon ourselves to know that we deserve equality, we deserve justice, and for us to speak up. So, sorry.
One thing I think that's a real challenge that can be a start is to answer people in such a way or approach them in such a way when they see that they don't just look through you. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes they don't see past the hijab. They don't see the person in there. They can't believe that, one of the hilarious ones, we were at a conference, and another sister, a friend of mine, we were both hijabis, and we're both doing this workshop at 8:30 in the morning in a winter, thing in Cincinnati, Ohio. And some people came out to hear this presentation, and we're talking along, and so this guy says, how come you Muslim women don't go out and speak? I looked at her and I'm like, yeah, and so she said, where's your husband? And I said, my husband's at home watching the kids right now. She said, yeah, so's mine. So finally one of the people in the room said to him, he said, can you go take your baggage and leave it outside the door and then come back in again? They don't see you. I went to register my daughters for high school in the regular, normal American, high school across the street from where I live. And we had this school, and I taught them AP World History and all that stuff, So they're coming, and the person at the registration desk, said, "Well, can I give you the papers for the English as a second language?" And I said, I don't think we'll be needing that. And
that's my favorite. Yeah.
I know, but she was looking through. It's like transparent, like she wasn't seeing past and it took a while to get that. And I had a number of the kids that were with us in this school went to their schools and had the same exact experience. They'll speak to them in perfect English, and they would come at them with, So that, to address, and you have to be incredibly patient and have, I think, a lot of sense of humor as well. But just keep at it, just make them, say things that are going to, you don't have to be come at them with it, because they don't realize it. They really just don't realize it. But that, I think, is very empowering. Once you break through that, then they start to really see you. And even collectively, when women do things that really cause them to see beyond, a herd of hijabis.
Yeah, I would call it like a dog and pony show almost, where, I believe that you could be self-actualized, and maybe some of the sisters sitting at the tables feel that they are, but as a group, we're stronger, right? And so when we go out and do things together, and it's a dog and pony show, then people start to believe it, right? And so the more that you can show it, the more that people will believe it, and then that will change their opinion, right? Even if it's the brothers that are sitting, in your classroom, or people in another country, whatever it is, if you feel like you're great, you're self-actualized, well, that's half the battle, right? But getting it in an en masse actually helps too.
Did you have a question?
Yeah. If there's a follow-up on that, I'll...
Go ahead.
Okay. Both of my parents they were Christian when they got married, and they came to Islam together. But one of the problems that they both faced was my father's family wasn't very religious, but my mom's was they went to church every day, they read the Bible every Sunday. So it was when she converted, she got it was very hard for her because her family somewhat ostracized her, and even to this day, some of that I guess the way they treated her, it's still residual, it happens sometimes even when we go back and visit my family, and they had that their family ostracizing them. But I feel they told me that when they would sometimes go to the Muslim community to look for solace or peace, but then they would sort of in some way find that same ostracization because we were American Muslims, they're African Americans specifically, and it's they get that feeling that other people are treating us as we're not real or genuine Muslims. So have you ever felt that sort of I guess struggle in any way being ostracized from both communities, and what advice would you give to a new Muslim specifically who was in that same situation?
Wow. So alhamdulillah, thank God, I never had to go through that with my family, my immediate family. But my best friend did, where her mother and father didn't talk to her for 20 years. They didn't want to see her, they didn't want to talk to her, they thought that she had lost her mind. And her struggle was that she had to be faithful, but be good to her parents. And so she tried for 20-some years to get her parents to even talk to her. You can't give up. That's the real message, is that you have to honor the mother and the father and all of that kind of stuff, and be just patient. But that happens all the time to other people. And so part of that English is my first language. Part of that in the Muslim community I experienced. So when I converted, it was all roses and everything, and all the brothers were really happy and excited, and as soon as I became a Muslim, it was you're dropped like a hot potato. Why? Because you're a woman who's not married, first of all. So you shouldn't be hanging out with the brothers now suddenly, right? But part of that is that you're a convert. And to this day, I don't understand from the heritage community, okay? Speaking to everybody that's part of the heritage community, what the bias is against converts. because they're not accepted readily into the community. And that's so tough to be alone with a new religion and a new set of rules that you have to follow, and no one to sit there with you and be like, okay, sweetheart, you know, you can treat me like a child. Okay, sweetheart, but you would probably be best served doing this. Or, hey, there's a really great event that you should go to, or something like that. So the Muslim community, and that's why I'm saying American Muslims really need to step up to the plate on this, and I myself need to do this, and so that's why I'm saying it, is that I joined a new masjid, okay? My first thing is like, how do I get involved? Because I know that there are going to be converts, and I don't want them to feel as horrible as I felt when I wasn't accepted into the community. And so that's my challenge, right? But it is, you know, either you step up to the plate and help, or you kind of don't.
As a follow-up on that, so you both talked about your experience and what drew you into Islam. As you've reflected back on that experience, is there anything in your pre-conversion experience in Presbyterian Church and Catholicism that has ultimately helped enhance your experience as a Muslim and that has made you a better Muslim?
Oh yeah, you bet. CCD was the biggest thing. For those of you who don't know what CCD is, it's, how do you say it exactly? Catholic Condoctrination? Wait, is it? I forget the exact title of it. But it's a doctrine classes. So you go every Sunday as a child your whole life for religion classes. Even if you go to a secular school or you don't go to a secular school, you still have to go. And that helped prepare me for Islam the best way possible, is learning about the scriptures and having it beaten into my head a million times, going to these religious classes. And that's when Susan was saying, it's like, oh my God. Oh yeah, this isn't like foreign, okay. And so a lot of that basis was actually the most important thing that I could have had to prepare me to be a Muslim.
Something similar perhaps, but a lot of times converts that I've heard have said that they looked for answers in their tradition when they had questions, especially in that time of youth, and they often didn't get answers. And I remember a specific incident. Before I knew anything about Islam, I was in one of those, 16, 17-year-old, mental fogs, and I happened to stop by, was walking home and mad at somebody or something, and I happened to walk by the church where I had been confirmed, and the window was lit up there, and so I went in for some reason, and I went in, I had some questions, and I started asking. This was not the priest I had grown up with, or the pastor, and the answer I got to my questions was, oh, you're too young to understand those things, you'll understand it in the by and by. I'm like, see you around. So for me, I think through searching in the sense of reading philosophies and reading, I was curious about what the different religious experiences were. And there were, in college, situations opening up that would let me sort of think about those things. So I think that did it. But maybe, I think the most durable part is the garage sale, that you have when you stop and think, okay, so this is how I've been behaving. What I wanted from Islam was to find a path to set myself on that made sense, and that, the word in Arabic is furqan, the criteria, to have a criterion for life that you don't deviate from, in the sense, not in a straight and narrow sense, but in a sense of, here's a criterion for deciding what to do. And I don't know where that came from exactly, but it's lasted through all the stuff, and particularly the negative things that Yahya challenged us with, dealing with, Muslims living for better or worse, human beings for that matter, living for better or worse, versus, okay, what is the path that religious traditions take us down that is based on bedrock principles? And the garage sale, you know, all the other stuff might have gone, but I didn't sell that. That stuff didn't go. Didn't have a price on it, you know, it's going to stay. That's the furnishing.
Okay, any final, last? Okay, yes, go ahead, the last.
So like, for a lot of converts to Islam, the way they view Islam is like really impacted by like their initial source. So like some people, they get converted to radical Islam and things like that. So like for people who are wanting to learn more about Islam, like what advice would you give them?
Wow, don't soul source. Don't soul source.
Oh, yeah.
So that was like, okay, I'll own that because I did that in the beginning. Like I had one friend and she was like my source. She was Somali. She had a great, you know, outlook on life. My sisters.
I'm the only one here, so.
Really?
Yeah.
MashaAllah. So, man, we got to talk, okay? And so, you know, I was like I was on my road. I was really excited. And then I was like, I heard some of the other people talking. I was like, who? Like the Scooby thing, because I was like, really? And so then I was like, my advice to people is don't soul source, because although she had it going on and she really understood her religion, I mean, it was better to hear another perspective and somebody else from, you know, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's from Saudi Arabia, whether it's from, you know, Lebanon, or whether it's from the United States, I should say, or Canada. Because for me, I think that I learned that lesson fairly quickly, is that you can't just take one person's word. And so, you know, as much reading as I would do, I'd be like, okay, here's my question. Okay, you're going to answer it. No, that's not the best way to do it. So then when I found another community where I could ask, you know, and then 5 different people, like you said, give you 5 different answers, but at least I'm able to see some connectivity and some challenges there with some of the answers. But, you know, at the end of the day, you sort of have to decide on your own as well.
Well, one test of reliability of somebody's sourcing is to ask why and see what happens. If there's a big, long pause, that can be good if there's something coming after it. But if there's nothing forthcoming after that, then you might need to move on.
Like, how did you guys figure out, like, what your interpretation of Islam would be? Like, what you considered the true Islam?
Wow.
Like, how long did it take you to finally get that image, that picture?
Years? Years and years and years?
I'm not done.
Yeah.
I'm not done.
One last question.
Only because you're from Somalia.
So a lot of us here in this room, we grew up in the post 9/11 America, and a lot of us, my parents are from Somalia, but I was born here, so I consider myself primarily American from Somalia, and I identify more with American culture. But definitely, I went to public school all my life, and towards the end of middle school and high school, it's not like I had a choice, but I had these 2 identities. I was American, I was Somali at home, and I was Muslim. But everyone seemed to see Muslim over everything else. And so when I decided to wear hijab, when I went to high school, a lot of my classes, I took higher level classes, and we didn't have a lot of diversity. So whenever I walked into a room, I just assumed that I was ESL, like student who was lost. And I kind of, in the beginning I was frustrated, but then I kind of made fun of it, and I would wait until they did attendance. And then when I spoke, like, oh my God. And I was like, yeah, I was born here. like it or not, I was born here. So I was just going to ask, how do we, as Muslims, because I think the context now is that, well, like, I guess 9/11 was what is Islam, we want to know what Islam is, but now it's more like, oh, we know what Islam is and it's bad. So it's like, how do we deal with those kind of, they're not really questions, but assumptions, and almost statements, and they say it as if it's like firm, that like, Islam is against women, like how could you be of that tradition that's against you, and like, Islam doesn't provide rights for certain people, like how do you deal with that? So how do we approach this question without being exhaustively defensive, but then also not being, you know, I don't know, like having the patience to deal with it. But I guess sometimes if you go through it with like a neighbor, it depends on who you're doing it with.
Yes,
some people might take it personally, or if it's a good friend, they'll be like, oh, my bad, I shouldn't have said that, and they kind of watch and think about what they're saying before they talk to you. So I guess there's a really thin, blurred, fine line, and if you guys have any suggestions or seen some successful means of getting through that, that would be great if you could tell us.
Okay. one of the things that happens so often in my workshops that's similar to what you're describing is when people will ask a question, and before you can even answer the question, you have to unpack the question, because the question is taken off from the wrong tarmac altogether. And so it's a process of, you know, maybe asking them to reframe what it is they're either asking or saying, and then you can work backwards. It's just slow, systematic, patient, you know. And I mean, I find people very receptive. But it's a tough road to hoe, because I mean, things keep seeming to get so much worse in terms of how can we even answer when such atrocious things are going on. I mean, beheading an archaeologist.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Blowing up, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. And getting down behind, like, what could possibly be behind this kind of thing. It didn't come out of thin air. It's, you know, I think also it's really important, maybe not to obsess, but to read beyond, below, beneath the face value explanations that are coming out of the media, read history, read, you know, deep things, and get an arsenal of things to say, not just to educate yourself in your faith, but in also the, you know, the circumstances. It's not necessarily fun, but I think it helps.
I don't know, I always feel like I'm a spokesmodel for Islam. It's like...
Everyone asks you, but you have to.
Exactly. I mean, and sometimes you do have to get on the defensive, but you try to turn it into a positive, right? And it just kind of gets, it kind of grates on you a little bit, but that's just who we are, and that's the path that sometimes you have to accept in a way. And you're trying to, again, engage people and change their opinions, and maybe if you change the one, then they change another one, and the cascading effect. But ultimately, I mean, I don't have a good thing saying, yes, we can change the world by, I wish I did.
Well, can we give our wonderful guests a big hand? Tajdid, to renew, to reform, to rethink, or I call it sometimes to reconstruct. Taking your time to reread and reread into the text, reread into your own circumstances. Sometimes reinterpret, sometimes understand something that may not have been the case or has been, or re-questioning. Ara mini re. It's okay to do that. That's what Tajdid is all about. To believe it's a noble thing to go back, take time to uncover. And we need to do that with the faith that it will help us become better Muslims and more engaged with our own faith and more prepared to deal with tomorrow and its challenges. Not that we have the magic answers. It might take 80 years. And there are questions that you may have to challenge yourself to answer, even when you are 80 and at hospice. It's not something that, sometimes there are questions that cannot be easily answered, and it's okay. And I don't think God wants us to answer some of these questions, as long as, again, the concept of ijtihad, man ijtahada fa akhta, man ijtahada fa asab, as long as you do your best to understand, even if you make a mistake, you are still rewarded. But keep trying to understand, keep trying to ask the question. And the Quran tells us in Surah 3, Ali Imran, that some of the Quranic verses are mutashabihat, are ambiguous. And I think it's a challenge for us from the Quran itself to take our time to understand the ambiguous, to understand the possibly confusing. Maybe it's meant to be confusing to give us our time to understand it, based on our own cultural background.
Can I add something, Yahya?
Yeah.
You know, people who live in a golden age a lot of times probably don't know they're living in a golden age. But in some ways, as horrendous as things may seem, this is the first generation. When I say generation, I mean like 50 years or even 100 years of people who have come out into the world, mixed themselves up, and gotten to know each other firsthand. If you go back in history, people were in a place and they had intermediaries, their religious leaders or their political leaders, who filtered their experience of other people in the world. What we have going on right now, not just with Islam, but Islam is a good case study. We have people from all over the world, in universities, in communities, in high schools, in nursery schools, in neighborhoods, who are encountering one another on a personal level. We have an unprecedented access to the written sources of Islam, and we have an amazing activity going on of scholars from various countries here and from here in other countries, studying, writing, thinking, reconsidering, broadcasting all of this out on the internet for us to absorb. This has never happened in the whole 14-some-hundred years of history. So it is like a golden age of understanding. It was only less than 100 years ago that the West even heard about Hinduism and Buddhism and the Eastern traditions. It didn't happen. Oxford University Press started publishing, translations of scriptures in the late 19th century. And we have them, and more scriptures and more sources and more. So, there's a lot of thought going on, plus all the interfaith and ecumenical work that's going on. So in a sense, religiously, even while it looks awful, I think we're on the verge of some really amazing and exciting developments.
Indeed, indeed. I mean, I think it was Imam Shafi'i who said that my fatwa is nothing more than my understanding of the situation I'm questioned about based on the data that's available to me. And he himself said that if you have other data to counter my argument, bring it on. And I'll be willing, the first one, to say, wait a minute, I'm wrong. And the availability of this data will help us as Muslims, by the way, reconstruct, I believe, a new image of Islam that may never have existed in history, in ways that we will be surprised about. And anyway, we need to finish. Specific things I wanted us to think about as we move. We heard the word education, educate ourselves, availing ourselves with the information that's out there. To ask the question, what brought us to this point, is a question that needs to be asked and continue to be asked, especially on a campus. We need to change the image by changing ourselves and asking ourselves the questions, what got us wrong and what we need to change as Muslims, whether in the issue of gender and women or other issues. We need to ask the question about what is cultural and what is Islam, what is truly of what the faith wants us to do vis-a-vis the birth and the product of a specific cultural experience. I like the term. I want you to write a book about garage sale. I like that. It's an amazing thing. I believe a Muslim community, from what we heard tonight, needs to become more compassionate.
We need to have a mega garage sale.
A mega. A compassionate community that accommodates, that embraces, and it's a part of what will help us move forward with Tajdid. Just to conclude, I went to a Christian seminary, and I took a few courses on Hadith back in Sharia college to train me as an imam. But when I went to a Christian seminary, and having to take courses on biblical criticism, and so many of these courses, I ended up writing all of my papers on a comparison between Hadith sciences and biblical criticism theory, to find a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences that helped me become more understanding of Hadith literature, but sometimes more critical of specific Hadith back 25 years ago. Data that back then, 25 years ago, my young friends here, no one would dare asking. No one would dare asking 25 years ago specific hadiths that we perceived back 25 years ago as musallamat, as it's of course that's hadith. And now there are tons of Muslim scholars throughout the world questioning those specific hadiths. Why? Because we Muslims have been exposed to this other literature that forced us to think critically of our own tradition and come up with a new methods. So, it was a very positive experience of how the idea of silent retreats that Catholics do a lot. The first time I heard it, oh my God, this is too Christian, too Christian. But wait a minute, when I really went back to study my own tradition, the concept of khalwa, oh my God, absolute seclusion. And I found hadiths where the Prophet said, you have to always find a time for your own khalwa, your own seclusion where you become absolutely silent, retreating from the world, find a time to think, reflect, and change. I found Islam, not through Islamic literature, but through Christian practices of silence that I did not know we have. To conclude, my friends, this is one of so many of these panel discussions that I think we will enjoy.
I really want to say one thing. You know Abdullah al-Faruqi from the Nawawi Foundation in Chicago?
Yeah.
He gave speaking about culture, he gave the most beautiful metaphor about culture and Islam that I ever heard. So it's not a question of this is culture and this is Islam. He described culture as the stones in a riverbed all over the world, as if and Islam as the water that flows over it. So that, Islam came and flowed in the shape of the rocks, in the shape of the stream beds, and so culture and Islam, were intertwined in this way. So it isn't just a question of here's an Islam and here's culture, and we, are striving to this kind of Islam that is beyond culture. It's how do we mesh our culture, after the garage sale.
What is our theme for the year? Empowering our community, empowering our women. We heard it earlier today. Women are empowered by Islam. We have to get people to believe it. We have to actualize it. Thank you for your question. You summarize our theme for the year.